This happened back in 2018, and it stuck with me in a way I can't really shake. I've only told a few close friends, but one of them suggested I post it here to see if anyone else has experienced something similar. I still don't know what I encountered that weekend in the woods, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. I was 21 at the time, and had gone up to rural northern Michigan to visit an old family friend who I'll call Tom. My dad and Tom had been close since childhood, and he owned a small hunting cabin out near Burt Lake, surrounded by thick forest and marshland, no neighbors for miles. My dad couldn't make the trip, so I went with my older brother to help Tom with some firewood and get the cabin ready for deer season. The cabin was modest, just 2 rooms, no electricity, and a wood stove for heat. Since space was tight and it was early fall, Tom said I could crash in the old pop-up camper parked about 200 feet behind the cabin, down a thin path and tucked under some old pines. It was dry, safe, and honestly, I didn't mind the solitude. The first night, we had a chili, sat around the fire, and listened to Tom's stories about bear sightings and strange things he'd seen over the years. Nothing outlandish, just enough to make you side-eye the trees after dark. I headed out to the camper at around 11 p.m. with a headlamp and a sleeping bag. About halfway down the path, I clicked off my light to look at the stars. They were incredible, but in that moment, I noticed how uncomfortably quiet it had gotten. Not just peaceful forest quiet. I mean dead silent. No wind or branches making any noise. No insects chirping. Just this heavy, pressing stillness. Then the feeling hit me, like I was being watched. Like something was standing just beyond the tree line. I don't know how to explain it, but I suddenly felt completely exposed, like I was prey. Every instinct in me screamed to move. I bolted to the camper, slammed the door behind me, and locked both latches. I tried laughing it off, told myself I was just rattled from the stories and the isolation, but I barely slept. I kept hearing soft sounds outside, faint footsteps on the leaves, what sounded like brushing against the canvas sides. It never got close enough to be sure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was circling the camper. The next day, I told my brother, and he teased me for being dramatic. But Tom was quiet. I think he knew I wasn't making it up. That night, I asked if I could bring his dog, Scout, with me. Scout was an older lab mix, usually lazy and laid back, but solid. The walk back to the camper that night felt easier with Scout trotting beside me, until we got near the tree line again. That's when Scout stopped. His ears went up, his head turned slowly to the side. His tail dropped. He didn't bark, he didn't growl. But he didn't want to move forward either. We eventually got inside, and Scout curled up next to the bed. I started to drift off, until I had this horrible, vivid dream. Something was whispering my name from just outside the canvas wall. It wasn't malicious, just wrong. Repetitive, like someone trying to mimic my own voice. I woke up in a sweat, and Scout was sitting up, facing the corner, hackles raised, ears pinned back. Morning couldn't come fast enough. I packed my stuff up and told Tom I'd head back a day early. He didn't question it. Before we left, I took Scout out into the clearing behind the cabin for some fresh air, hoping to shake off the weird feelings from the night before. I decided to check out the edge of the woods a bit, just to walk around and clear my head. As I walked along the path, I was half focused on Scout, who was sniffing around, wagging his tail like usual. But something made me stop. I noticed a strange set of marks in the dirt, leading from the woods to the clearing. They were deep, jagged scratches, almost as if something had dragged itself across the ground. The dirt was torn up like claws had been raking through it. I bent down to get a closer look. The marks led toward the edge of the woods, but they stopped abruptly. I mean, they just ended. I straightened up, feeling uneasy. I turned to call Scout, but before I could get a word out, he froze. He was standing just beyond the marks, staring into the woods. His body was completely still, eyes locked on something in the trees. I called his name, trying to get him to come back, but he didn't respond. His ears flattened against his head, his tail dropped. He didn't even twitch. I started to walk toward him, but something prickled the back of my neck. It was that same sensation of being watched, but this time it was different. It felt like I wasn't just being watched. It felt like something else was there, something much bigger. When I reached Scout, I grabbed his collar. I noticed something I'll never forget. His eyes were wide, staring directly into the woods, as if something was standing just beyond the trees, watching us. Then I heard it. My voice, echoing back from the woods. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even close, but it sounded like my voice, delayed and distorted, almost as if it was trying to repeat what I just said, but not quite right. I turned and yelled, "Scout, come here." The echo came again, but this time it was louder, more insistent and wrong. It wasn't me anymore. I froze. That was it. I didn't even look back. I grabbed Scout, yanked him toward the cabin, and ran. I tried explaining what happened to Tom, but he just looked at me with this unreadable expression. He explained very seriously that if I hear a voice from the woods, to ignore it and never respond to it, and under no circumstances was I ever to go to it. And then he told me to think no more on it. I haven't been back since. I think Tom knows more than he lets on. My brother thinks it was just an echo or my imagination, but I know what I heard, and Tom did too. A friend of mine's family owns a cabin on about 60 acres of land out in the Pacific Northwest. It's deep woods, pretty isolated, no neighbors in sight, and the nearest paved road is a good couple of miles away. The cabin is tucked away and surrounded by forest on all sides. You'd never find it if you didn't already know where to go. They've even got a locked steel gate a mile down the access trail to keep out trespassers and hunters. The place has always felt safe. You get your usual wildlife, black bears, coyotes, raccoons. Sometimes you hear owls or the occasional elk crashing through the brush, but nothing that ever made me feel nervous to be there. A couple of autumns ago, my friend and I went up for a weekend, just the two of us. We brought a cooler of food, his old dog, and a couple of shotguns just in case. No cell signal, no Wi-Fi. No distractions. The whole point was to disconnect. We spent the day hiking around the property, target shooting with some cans, and doing small maintenance on the cabin. Clearing brush off the trails, chopping some wood, cleaning out the wood stove chimney. Classic fall chores. That night, we grilled dinner over the fire pit, had a couple of beers, and headed inside once the temperature started to drop. We lit a few candles, put on some music through a Bluetooth speaker, and spent the next hour or so at the table tying flies. My friend's really into fly fishing, and I've picked up a bit of it too. So he's brought his vise, some feathers, and thread, and we were just sitting there chatting, working on a few patterns. Right around midnight, we were winding down, just about to clean up the tools, when it happened. 3 loud, deliberate slams at the back door. Bang, bang, bang. We both froze. Like that total body freeze where you feel the hair on your arms stand up. Each hit made the whole door shudder in its frame. It wasn't an animal brushing past. It felt like something was trying to get in. Slowly, purposefully. Then the Bluetooth speaker suddenly cut out. No low battery warning, no disconnection sound, just silence. It had been fully charged. My friend's old dog, who'd been lying by the stove, stood up and locked his gaze on the back door. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just stared. Then, everything outside went silent. I mean dead quiet. No wind, no insects, no distant rustling. Just that heavy, ringing stillness you feel more than hear. The kind of silence that puts your gut on edge. After what felt like a solid minute, my friend whispered, "Did you lock the back?" I had, but we still grabbed the shotgun and flashlight and quietly checked every door and window. Nothing, just trees, darkness, and that awful feeling like something was just beyond the light. At one point, while sweeping the flashlight across the tree line, we both saw something move. Not eyes, not a full shape, just motion stepping out of the beam before we could focus on it, like it was deliberately avoiding the light. It could have been nothing, but it could have been something. We ended up bunking in the loft, shotguns close, barely saying a word. There were no more sounds, no more knocks, just hours of tense silence. Around 5:30 a.m., the woods slowly started coming back to life. A few crickets, distant birds. That's when we finally exhaled. In the daylight, we found a deep dent in the metal back door, low to the ground. Like something man-sized had hit it hard. The door jamb was cracked too. There were no footprints, no disturbed dirt, nothing. We checked the trail cam facing the entrance. It had shut off sometime the night before. The batteries were fine. We packed up and left pretty quickly after that. We didn't even eat breakfast, just tossed everything in the truck and got out. I've been back since then, but only with a group. I still have no idea what that was. My friend's dad replaced the door, but kept the dented panel. He said he'd seen a thing or two out there, but wasn't willing to elaborate. This happened a few years ago, and I've gone back and forth about posting it. This was in the summer of 2020, mid-July. The world was still in limbo, and everyone was stuck indoors. So my girlfriend at the time, Sarah, my best friend Rob, and his sister Claire, all decided we needed a weekend out in nature. No phones, no crowds, just trees, hiking, and quiet. Rob's uncle owns a little off-grid cabin in the Umpqua National Forest. Nothing fancy, no power, no running water, but a propane stove, wood stove, old bunk beds, and an outhouse about 50 feet out back. It's a 45-minute drive from the nearest paved road, and when you're out there, you feel completely cut off, which we wanted at first. We got there Friday afternoon. The place had that musky, unused smell, but not in a gross way, just old wood, dust, and forest air. Everything was intact, no signs of mice or wildlife getting in, which surprised me. We unpacked, made dinner on the propane stove, and spent most of that evening outside playing cards and watching the stars. It was honestly one of the best nights I've had outdoors. We turned in at around 11:30 p.m. Rob and Claire took the bottom bunks, and Sarah and I took the top ones. The cabin has one main room and a tiny kitchen off to the side, so it's a cozy space. We locked the front door using an old metal bolt that slides across. Definitely not modern security, but it was something. At 2:30 a.m., I woke up. I didn't hear anything at first. It was more like I sensed something, like when your brain pulls you out of sleep for no reason. Then I started hearing footsteps, not wildlife, not scurrying or twig snapping. These were slow, steady, heavy footsteps on the front porch, like work boots on wood planks. I stayed still and just listened. I thought maybe it was Rob going out to pee, but when I peeked over the edge of the bunk, I could see him still wrapped up in his sleeping bag. Same with Claire. I whispered to Sarah, and she was already awake. She said, "Do you hear that?" And I just nodded. The steps stopped. We didn't hear anything else for a couple of minutes, and eventually, I worked up the nerve to climb down, grab my flashlight, and open the door. There was nothing there. No tracks in the dirt, no sounds in the woods, no movement at all. Just dead, still air and forest. I even walked a few feet out toward the clearing, shining my light around. Nothing. I came back in, and we chalked it up to nerves. Maybe an animal we misheard, and we went back to bed. The next morning was clear and cool, but when we stepped outside, I immediately noticed the old wooden shed behind the cabin, about 25 yards into the woods, was wide open. We definitely hadn't gone in there. Rob even made a joke about it when we first arrived, saying it looked like the set of a horror movie. It had a warped, sagging door and was half covered in moss. Inside were some old tools, chopped firewood, rusted nails, and some random junk. Nothing dangerous, just weird that it was open. It looked like someone had moved things around. An axe was leaning against the door instead of being racked. A pile of rope had clearly been uncoiled and dropped. Claire even said it smelled faintly like tobacco inside, which none of us had brought. That night, we were all a bit more on edge. We double-checked the door bolt, moved our bags closer together, and even made jokes about Uncle Larry's haunted shack. But around 1:45 a.m., something happened that we all heard. The sound of the front door creaking open. It was long and slow, like in a movie. The thing is, the door was still bolted shut. We checked it right away. It hadn't moved, but we all heard it. No question. It was loud enough that Rob sat up immediately and said, "Is someone outside?" Again, we searched. Nothing. No animals, no wind, no movement in the trees. But it felt off. Like the air had changed. That thick, charged feeling, like before a thunderstorm, but without any clouds in the sky. We barely slept that night. The next morning, we found a handprint on the outside of one of the back windows. It was faint, kind of sticky looking, like someone had touched the glass with bare skin and left a residue. None of us remembered touching that window. Claire swore it wasn't hers. She said she hadn't even gone near that side of the cabin. That was enough. We packed up and left a day early. On the way out, we stopped to call Rob's uncle and told him what had happened. He laughed and said something like, "Oh, you met the cabin ghost. Totally casual." Said other people had mentioned footsteps and door sounds over the years, but that it was harmless. He never mentioned that when we were planning the trip. So, yeah, I'm not saying the place is haunted, but something was going on. Could it have been an animal? I guess. But we've all camped enough to know what raccoons, coyotes, even bears sound like. This felt different. Purposeful. Like someone was out there and inside. We've camped plenty since then, but never in that cabin. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened. was 11 when this happened. Anna, my older sister, was 14, and Becky, my younger sister, was 8. My dad was a freelance programmer when I was younger. He made great money on his jobs, but because he was so heavily in debt, 500,000 plus, and my mom was not the most gifted person on balancing a budget, we never had much free money available. This meant that we went on a vacation once every few years, and usually that was to a relative's house. My dad had just finished a long project for a big client, and we were celebrating the occasion with a new movie, Final Destination, because my dad loved watching scary stuff and scaring the daylights out of my sisters and I. We were in the middle of the movie when the phone rang. He went to get it and came back to grab my mom while we kept watching the movie. Becky took the opportunity to pause the film and take Duchess, our dog, captive because she was scared. They came back about 10 minutes later and announced that we were going to be spending the weekend in a cabin. We didn't know what to make of that, but apparently the client he'd been helping owned a nice cabin by a lake in the mountains and offered to let us lodge there that weekend for a considerably reduced price. It was Thursday, so my mom went into a panicked frenzy of packing so we didn't see the rest of the movie that night. After school the next day, we packed up the family van and headed to the mountains. It was a 2.5-hour drive, so it was late by the time we got there. We unloaded the van and went exploring in the cabin. It was a ranch-style cabin with a little nook thing you could climb up to that was about head height. It was about 3 feet tall and probably meant for storage, but it was an excellent place for the 3 of us to hang out in and play games. There were a few dozen board games up there, so we started playing once we decided on the rooms. My mom and dad got the largest one. Anna claimed the smaller one with a twin bed, so Becky and I got the last room, which had a queen-sized bed we could share. We had a window on the right side of the bed without a curtain, and a lamp on the left side of the bed. It was the only light source in the room, and there was a closet opposite the bed. It was locked, and we couldn't get in it. I never did figure out what was inside there. We went to bed at around 11. Becky is a kicker, so I slept by the lamp in case she ended up knocking it over. I remember lying down, and I must have instantly fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, Becky was gripping my arm and trying to burrow under me. She was squeaking something in fright, and I couldn't understand what was happening. I sat up, looked towards her, and I saw something pale and human-shaped moving away from the window. My sleepy brain took several moments to process that, and then I was shooting out of bed and dragging Becky with me. We rushed to our parents, who told us we were imagining things. My mom told us to go back to bed, and if we saw anything else, to let them know. I, much to my current annoyance, agreed with them and went back into the room with Becky. We switched positions because she refused to go back to bed by the window. I told her a story to get her to sleep and promptly conked out after her. I didn't wake up until morning. The next day, we went exploring around the lake for about an hour before my dad decided we'd spend the day in town. They had a lot of small shops, and my parents went into every one of them. We ate lunch and dinner in the town, and finally went back to the cabin. Anna made a joke about something as we neared the cabin, and I remember everybody laughing before my dad suddenly held up his hand to make everyone stop. He took another step towards the cabin and pushed the door open with a single finger. I thought it was strange that the door wasn't latched, but I didn't put the obvious together right away. "Dad," Anna said as she shuffled nearer to Belle and I, but my dad gave his head a shake to let her know she needed to be quiet. He went into the cabin and disappeared inside for a minute or two while we stood on the porch. My mom called out his name, and he called back that we could come inside. We did, and found him standing in the middle of the living room/dining room with a frown on his face. He locked the door once we were inside, and he took my mom to the bedroom for a quick chat. Anna, having caught on to what was happening, opted to distract Becky and I by suggesting another round of the board game we'd been playing the previous night. We hadn't been playing for more than 5 minutes when my mom and dad came back. My mom went about cleaning the dishes from breakfast while my dad joined our game. We played for a few hours before Dad told us we needed to go to bed. It was only 9 at that point, which made Anna mad. She was allowed to stay up until 10:30 on school nights and later on the weekend nights. Becky and I got into bed while they argued. We climbed back into the same spots we slept in, Becky by the window and I by the lamp. I read the bell for a bit before we drifted off. I woke to my dad rushing into our room. He scooped Becky out of the bed and grabbed my hand. He dragged me out of the room and into the hall, where I saw Anna getting similar treatment by my mom. I became aware of a high-pitched whine in the living room and saw our dog sitting at attention by the back door. She was bristled and seemed anxious. My dad didn't put Becky down and didn't let go of my hand. They rushed out of the house and into the van. My dad went back to get our dog, and then he burned rubber getting out of the cabin. He drove all the way back home without saying a word. It took a half hour for Duchess to calm down. He told Anna what happened the next day, but Becky and I didn't find out until years later. He'd woken up that night to what sounded like moaning outside the window in his room. He jumped up and looked to see what was going on, and he found the front door unlocked. Stuff in the kitchen had been moved, and Duchess started to growl at the back door, which was ajar. He locked it and got us out of the house. He went back the next day to get our luggage and found several pairs of footprints outside the window of the room that Belle and I slept in. This story takes place in a very remote wooded area in northern Sweden. At the time, I was about 15 years old. My and my cousin's family were staying in our summer cabin. The cabin is placed on a hill, and at the bottom of this hill, there's a cabin with a wooden bridge and 2 boats. The property is surrounded by a dense forest, so the only thing you can really see when looking out the window is the hill leading down to the lake in boats. It was maybe 9 p.m. when my dad, my sister, my 3 cousins and their dad and I decided to light a fire down by the lake. My grandparents, aunt and mom, decided not to go because it was getting late. We just wanted to look out at the lake, stargaze and chat. We brought our grandparents' dog and our cousin's dog with us. We walked down to the lake, lit the fire, and started talking. After about an hour, the conversation had fizzled out, but it was a nice silence. Suddenly, I started feeling a bit off, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from the woods. We were sitting with our backs facing the woods in the cabin. The feeling was unsettling, but I tried to think about other things, when from out of nowhere, my dad just says, "Yes, I'm good." Everyone turned to look at my dad in confusion, since there was no conversation taking place. My dad looks back at the cabin and then at my cousin, who was sitting next to him, and said, "Yeah, I'm doing good." "What?" She responded, confused. "You asked me how I was doing, so I answered," my dad said. "I didn't ask you anything," my cousin replied. My dad looked confused and then said that he'd felt someone lean over and whisper in his ear, "Hello, how are you?" He described feeling whatever it was breathe on his neck and put a hand on his shoulder. He thought it was my mom at first and turned around but didn't see anything. Right after explaining this, the 2 dogs that were with us started growling loudly while looking behind where my dad was sitting towards the woods. We all freaked out, put the fire out, and we all started running towards the cabin. So yeah, We haven't left the cabin when the dark hit ever since, and it's a memory that I'll never forget. But whatever it was nice enough to ask how my dad was doing, so I don't think it had bad intentions. If anyone has any idea of what this could have been, please let me know. The only thing I can think of is a Swedish nature spirit called Vitra that plays tricks on people, but according to some other people, can burn down buildings or capture people if they are bothering them. But they aren't really known for being nice, so I don't know. When I lived in rural Maine, my boyfriend at the time took me on a drive in his truck. He said he wanted to show me something he said he learned about from one of his college professors. We already kind of lived in the middle of nowhere, but we drove even further into literally nowhere. We were on this road that was 5 to 8 miles of just forest on both sides. No houses, no signs, no driveways, nothing. Then he pulls over near a slight break in the trees. There was a very overgrown old driveway chained off at the road with an old dilapidated sign that said private property. We parked on the road and walked in about half a mile, and there was this old abandoned log cabin house there. I don't know when it was built, but it was old enough to not have any connection to the electric grid and no electrical outlets inside. It was a bit odd, but my boyfriend said he'd been there before and led me to a door in the back where we could break in. He mentioned that the last property owner said in their will that no changes could be made to the property after they died, like no agriculture or major renovations, so I guess that's why the land was never resold, since nobody could do anything with it. I don't remember if we entered through the second floor somehow or climbed upstairs once inside, but I remember being on this loft that overlooked the interior of the house. It had no railing. It was a 15-plus foot drop right at the edge of the loft. Maybe there weren't any stairs inside at all, or a ladder. It was back in the fall of 2011 when I was a freshman in college, so it's a bit fuzzy. I remember seeing an old wood stove made of iron downstairs and a countertop, but otherwise, I think the place was pretty sparse and made entirely of wood. There was also no sink in the kitchen area and no bathroom, so that meant no plumbing either. The loft we were on had literally thousands of dead flies all over the floor. It was creepy and gross. I know they could have gotten stuck there over the years, but the sheer number of them on every surface and not being decayed or turned to dust was just so unnerving. My ex-boyfriend, for some reason, decides that this is a nice place to smoke weed. I didn't want to stay, but he laid a blanket out over the flies, and he sat and rolled a joint. I did take a couple of puffs, but started getting an uneasy feeling, so I stopped. I'm a regular smoker, but this was just a crazy situation. Then suddenly I realized that the sun was setting, and we were losing light fast. The house very quickly got this terrifying impending doom feeling, and I knew I just needed to get the hell out of there. I expressed my concerns to my boyfriend multiple times, each time seeming more desperate to leave, but he wasn't worried, and he took his sweet-ass time hand-rolling himself a cigarette and taking all the unnecessary shit out of his pockets, laying them out in the blanket, and slowly putting them away. It was pissing me off that he wasn't taking me seriously, and I had such a sense of urgency to get out. I ended up getting out of that house first and started hauling ass down that half-mile-long dirt driveway to get out in the way. My ex shuffled behind me, fumbling with things in his hands. I got out of the woods when we were just losing that last light before the true darkness set in. Mind you, this country road has no streetlights the whole way. He had flashlights, but I didn't feel that flashlights equaled safety. I felt we were being watched, and whatever it was really negative. I don't know if I overreacted or if my ex was literally just doped up and clueless, but I never really trusted him again after that. I don't know why I let myself get in that situation. Needless to say, he's not in my life anymore. I've lived in Southern California my entire life. If you know anything about California, it's very diverse. Up north is filled with mountains and trees, and the south is a lot more, well, city-like. This summer, I decided to take a trip to Lake Tahoe. It's a beautiful place, and my first time being upstate. I'm going to chop this story up into segments to make it easy. Day 1. I settled into the cabin at around 5 p.m. after an 8-hour drive. I was very tired. I went and lay down in the bed that was in the loft. It was quiet. It was like being in a different world. I was so used to cars zooming by and people talking right outside my house, but it was quiet. I fell asleep fairly quickly. Around 4 hours into my sleep, I jerked up. I looked around for a bit before hearing strange tapping. I looked around to see where it was coming from, but to no avail. It sounded like someone was tapping on the window part of the back door. I figured I was just paranoid and went back to sleep. Day 2. Nothing happened this day, and I slept fine. Day 3. I woke up early in the morning, maybe 4. I heard a crash coming from the attic ladder that was placed conveniently right behind the couch I was sleeping on. I didn't move. I heard a few footsteps. You know that feeling you get when you feel someone staring at you? That's how I felt. I was on my side, staring straight ahead. Suddenly, I felt somebody or something crawl over me. I felt their 2 hands on either sides of me, and I knew their face was inches away from mine. Like I said, I was facing straight ahead, and I wasn't going to turn my face to see who it was. They stayed there for what felt like forever, until I felt them crawl backwards and then off the couch. I heard the dog let out a muffled bark, in which someone shushed her, then let out a "good girl." The presence stayed there for what felt like an eternity, until I heard footsteps going out the back door. Still, I didn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. Needless to say, I didn't go back to sleep. I checked on my friends a bit later on when I felt the coast was clear. None of my friends had left their rooms that night. I told them my experience, and they said I was being paranoid. I halfway agreed with them, and our day went on as planned. Later on day 3, after a day at the lake with my friends, we came back to a quiet and cozy cabin. The caretakers of the cabin told us there was a river a bit farther back into the woods, about a 15-minute walk. My friends decided to stay back and rest, so I took some bug spray and a small backpack with snacks and my phone. It was a pretty straightforward trail. There was tall grass on either sides of the trail. It was a thin path, but pretty easy to navigate. When I got to the riverbank, there were 2 picnic tables. I didn't want to get eaten by mosquitoes, but I stupidly wore sandals. I put my bag on the table and started my walk back to the cabin. For some odd reason, the path seemed distorted. What was once a straightforward trail was now covered in rough terrain. I noticed the tall grass on the side of the path had been disturbed. It was as if something huge, and I mean gigantic, had walked over the long grass. At first I thought maybe it was a bear, since the locals had told us bears were a problem this time of year. But the sheer size of it made me second guess that. I was a bit taken aback by this. However, I continued and made it back to the cabin, then back to the river. I was a little frightened now. I kept telling myself I was just freaking myself out, and I should enjoy the nature. I sat down at one of the tables and watched the river. After a while, I felt like there was something staring at me. I looked around, assuming one of my friends was on their way to prank me, but there was no one. Across the river, I noticed a bit of brush that was shaken up. There was a clearing in the bushes that was fenced off by 2 logs in an X shape. The longer I sat in that spot, the more worried I got. I couldn't help but feel like there was something behind the thick brush that I couldn't see. I went down the river, hoping to come across some kind of life, but nothing. No fish, no frogs, no roads, just mosquitoes, and a bunch of them at that. Disappointed with the lack of anything really, I went to sit back at the table, and that's when I heard it. It was a noise I can't really describe. It was a scream, but a gurgle, as if whatever it was had a mouthful of water. It was inhuman. I froze. In the moment, I should have been running for my life, but I just froze. I heard rustling in the bushes behind me, the ones I was worried about earlier. Then, again, the scream. It was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Run. And so I did. I sprinted my ass through the forest. What should have been a quick trip back to the cabin was anything but. After about 10 minutes of sprinting, I noticed I was lost. I stopped for a few moments, frantic to see if I could find anything that looked familiar. I saw a bridge that I crossed on my way there, and I started sprinting. I thought to myself, why didn't that damn thing kill me? I'd stopped for a good minute, but I could hear it chasing me. It was a fucking game for the damn thing. Every time I stopped, it would as well. I finally made it back to my cabin, and instead of going inside, I stood on the porch. I faced the forest, and I cried. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary, but I knew it was still out there. I didn't want to turn my back to it, so I sat there for hours, silently crying, occasionally checking my phone, and, well, writing this. I don't know what the hell that thing was. The only thing I can even compare it to is a Wendigo. All I know is that I will not be going to that river ever again. If you could please shed some insight on what or who might have been out there, I would appreciate it. These past 2 days have just been too weird not to be connected. The last day of the trip, we burned some sage before heading to bed that night. My friend Brett came up to me around 4 in the morning and told me he couldn't sleep. We watched TV for a little while, before again hearing taps on the back window. It lasted a few seconds, and was sort of in intervals, if that makes sense. My friend Brett managed to get a video. We didn't check it out because, well, quite frankly, we were scared as hell. After about 10 minutes, the tapping stopped. Brett and I took turns sleeping. No other strange thing occurred that night. Brett and I were woken up by loud banging on the shed out back. We went to investigate, and there was nothing there. I'm leaving in 2 hours. I'm so excited to get back to the city life and leave this place and all its weird shit behind. Probably against my better judgment, I went back to the river to take some pictures. Something very strange happened while I was out there. I really can't explain it. It was loud gurgling noises and soft music. I was pretty deep in the forest, and there was no one out there with me. I got back to the house and had my friend Brett go up into the attic, while myself and the others watched from below. There was nothing up there. I'm not sure if I feel better or worse knowing there's nothing up there. I did find some sage under the cabinet, which makes me wonder if it was there for a reason. I'm an avid hiker and backpacker, and I recently went on a hiking trip in the Scottish Highlands with a group of friends. We planned to stay at a bothy before tackling some hills the next day. For those of you who don't know, a bothy is basically a basic shelter in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes an old farmhouse, sometimes a shed, anything to keep you warm and dry. They're free to use and usually come with a fireplace, some basic furniture, and minimal amenities. You don't need to book them or anything. You just show up. Sounds good, right? So, we found ourselves in an old farmhouse built back in the early 1800s. It has 2 stories, spacious enough for all of us to spread out upstairs and get some rest. The weather was cold and damp, and we had the fireplace roaring to keep warm. It was one of those perfect nights when you're in the middle of nowhere, everything's quiet, and you're just listening to the crackling fire while chatting away. No one else was around, as far as we knew. This particular bothy was a good few hours' walk from the nearest road, so it wasn't exactly a hot spot for passerbys. At about 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. It wasn't from a noise or anything at first, but I just felt uncomfortable. I lay there for a few moments, trying to shake it off. But then I heard something. The front door of the bothy creaked open slowly, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps downstairs. Heavy, deliberate steps, like someone walking around the main room. I froze. My mind immediately started racing, trying to figure out if it was one of us, if someone had gotten up in the middle of the night for some reason, or if someone else had wandered in. The footsteps continued for a minute or two, slow and steady, and then there was the unmistakable sound of the door slamming shut. After that, silence. Complete, utter silence. Now, at this point, we were all wide awake and fully alert. It was a gut instinct, but we all felt the same way. We were in the middle of nowhere, and I can't imagine anyone walking all that way, especially at 3 a.m. It wasn't like someone was casually passing by, and yet, it felt like someone was in the house with us. We couldn't ignore it, so we all decided to check things out. We tiptoed downstairs, and we didn't say a word to each other. Everyone felt that strange tension in the air, but no one wanted to voice it. It was like the footsteps had been loud enough to cause concern in the way you might think, but the way they'd stopped so abruptly, and the door slamming shut had us all on edge. We opened the front door and stepped outside into the pitch black night. There was nothing. No head torches from anyone nearby. No sound of anyone walking around. Not even an animal in the distance. This was a remote spot, miles away from any roads, so it's not like someone was going to just wander by, especially at that hour. We thought maybe there was someone camping nearby. Maybe someone who'd pitched up a tent and wandered in, thinking the bothy might have a toilet or something. But there was nothing. No trace of anyone at all. Just the cold night air and the howling wind. We stood there for a while, trying to make sense of it, but nothing added up. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of anyone else being there. We couldn't even hear the faintest footstep, not even a distant shout. There was nothing. After a few minutes of standing in the dark like idiots, we went back inside and locked the door. The whole thing felt off, but we tried to convince ourselves it was just the wind, or some strange noise from the house settling. The weird part, the next morning when we were packing up, we found out that this bothy was apparently well known for strange occurrences. A local told us that many people who had stayed there reported hearing footsteps when no one was around, or even feeling like they were being watched. The more I thought about it, the weirder it got. I'm not really a believer in ghosts or anything, but I couldn't help but feel there was something off about that night. It wasn't just the footsteps or the door slamming. It was the silence afterward, how everything went still, and how we couldn't find anyone nearby. It's one of those things that messes with your mind, and it's hard to explain. I've stayed in plenty of remote places before, and never once had something like that happen. I've heard people talk about the energy in certain places in the Highlands, but I'd always dismissed it as superstition. Now, though, I don't know. That night made me reconsider. Anyway, I'm not saying it was definitely a ghost or something, but there was something very strange about that night. It's probably just the isolation messing with our heads, but honestly, I still get chills thinking about it. If you ever stay at this body, keep an ear out. You might just hear something that you can't explain either. This was about 4 or 5 years ago. Back then, I lived with my mother in a shed on a farm surrounded by woodland. Our farmland was a part of a larger piece of farmland that was split up and sold off, so we did have neighbors, though they were roughly half a kilometer away each. We loved that because of the privacy. It wasn't like there was nobody nearby I could go to if I needed help. That thought is what had me fearlessly walking alone at night between the hours of 7 to 8 p.m., sometimes fluctuating from earlier to later depending on the day. Sometimes I even went out on a walk at 2 a.m. in the morning because I was restless and couldn't sleep. Looking back, this was incredibly stupid, and after this incident, I never walked after 6 p.m. ever again, always making sure there was at least some sunlight left when I set out. The route I always took was a road circuit. The first part was out in the open in front of all the other farms, including my own. If anything had happened, at least one person would have noticed, and reception was pretty good, so I would have also been able to call someone. The second half, on the other hand, was concealed by about 200 meters of woods between the farms and the back road, stretching the full 2 kilometers at the back of the farm. And it was during that part of the walk when I had this creepy encounter. It was late at night. I can't remember what time exactly, but it was pitch black with the exception of my torchlight. I was about to approach the turn in the loop that would bring me out into the open again when I heard it. Help. It was this monotone voice that repeatedly asked for help. It didn't seem panicked in the least. I took my earphones out and turned my music off to make sure I was hearing correctly, but it didn't stop. Help. Help. A very stupid part of me almost responded, because for some reason my first instinct was, oh no, someone's in trouble, like a naive kid, even though I would have been like 16 or 17 at the time. Of course, then my brain kicked in, and I realized that approaching that voice was just about the stupidest thing I could do, so I started quietly backing away. Unfortunately, my cat had followed me on the walk and wasn't backing away with me. No, she was walking towards the voice, softly hissing. I remember desperately trying to get her to come back towards me without alerting the voice to my presence, just in case they hadn't noticed me yet. But I was getting scared and didn't want to stay there a moment more, so I ran forward and grabbed her. I then turned around and bolted back towards the house. I don't know if it was stupid of me to turn my back to the voice, as I was making so much noise while running that there was no way they didn't know I was there, and I had no way of knowing if they were giving chase. I was so fucking terrified that whole time. The image of someone cloaked in shadows chasing me entered my mind, and even though I couldn't hear anyone behind me, I never once slowed down until I was back safe and sound within my house. It doesn't end there, though. Despite how terrifying it was, there was still a part of me that was concerned about whoever it was, because what if they really had needed help? So I asked my mother to drive us to the location. Another very stupid decision considering what we found, that being nothing. We called out and called out, but nobody answered. We didn't get out of our car though. Luckily neither of us were that stupid. We drove home, having seen nothing and no one. But it still bothered me in the morning, so I had my mother drive us over again, and we searched the immediate area. Nothing. No indication that anyone had been there. There was no body, which admittedly was a drastic thing to search for, but I know shock can leave you eerily calm, which could have explained the voice and the lack of response afterwards, and that made me fear we'd been too late, and we'd find a body in the morning. I don't know if I would have preferred this outcome, because at least then I would have had a face to the voice. But no, we found absolutely nothing, and to this day, I have no idea who that voice belonged to and why they were monotonously calling out for help. My mind has naturally come to some chilling conclusions and theories that leave me unable to sleep. Kidnappers, serial killers, all the classic horror stories. But I guess I'll never really know for sure. I live near a very large, very populated national park. Locals here, like myself, are pretty aware of the goings-on near here. Strange sounds, strange creatures, and strange disappearances. I have dealt with these myself in the past on hikes, and even just relaxing in the park. Here is one that still freaks me out to this day. I was at my grandma's house that's deep in the boonies. The only road to there is a gravel road that's pretty much washed away, so without a good car, you're not getting out there anyway. My cousins lived in a trailer with their moms right below my grandma's. We played all sorts of games, which mainly involved me getting chased. I was the youngest. My grandma was in the hospital with my aunt, so our older cousin, Dee, had to watch us. Dee was, and still is, the only cousin that's older than us that we still hold in high regards. He would mess with us and play around, but actually cared about us. The whole day we spent playing around, but we would usually play more at night. Things like hide and seek and tag and whatever else. We had been playing pretty far away from the house, and it was starting to get dark. We decided to go back to the house and grab flashlights and play manhunt. Of course, I was the one being hunted. I ran pretty far into the woods on the other side of the property and hid behind a log. I heard my cousins getting close, so I ran, and they saw me. We ended up running to the very back of the property line, almost a mile from the house, and we saw my cousin, Dee. He looked at us and kind of growled, and we all ran away from him, thinking it was a game. We ran back onto the gravel road, and we saw him walk out of the tree line, but he did it weird, kind of gloatingly in a way. We ran into the house and decided to barricade the door to play a prank on him. We moved a couple of things in front of the door, but decided to move the big coffee table in front of it too. As we loudly scooted the table across the floor, Dee came into the living room from the master bedroom, rubbing his eyes. We had obviously woken him up from all the movement, and he was mad. We had told him about seeing him chase us, and he got wide-eyed. He told us to go to our bedroom and stay there. We sat in the bedroom for about 20 minutes, and he came in and told us not to worry, that it was just him scaring us, and we went on with the night. It wasn't until about 3 years later, when I was 13, that he had told me the truth. It was a skinwalker. He told me that he's dealt with it when he was our age, and he proceeded to tell me his story. I may share this someday, depending on how far this goes. This is, of course, just one story. there are a lot more. About a year ago, I moved my family and I to a new home out in the woods in Tennessee. I wanted to be brief here, but I need to get this off my chest. And after looking into this matter a little more, I have a lot more details that I think will paint a clear picture in the end, so please bear with me. The nights here can be extremely loud. Between the crickets, the tree frogs, and the cicadas, it can almost be deafening. One night, not too long after we moved in, I'd forgotten something in my car and headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog wouldn't go outside with me. My dog goes everywhere with me as I'm her whole world, but not this night. As I held the door open, she looked out and then looked up at me like no. So, I walked out and shut the door behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was that there was not a peep. It was dead silent. I still shrugged this off and walked down my front steps and headed to my car. When I'd gotten about 10 feet from my car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt as though something was watching me. I looked around but saw nothing. After I reached in my car for what I'd forgotten to grab earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving towards me. I took a step back and checked around me. All of a sudden, I heard one of the hedges next to me that lined the walkway to our front door rattle. At first, I thought it was a rabbit that I'd spooked, as I had seen one just earlier in the day right where this was. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a large rock landing a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into a shrub. I drew my gun and called out, and said whoever this was is about to be shot. After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think that maybe this was some local teenagers messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned, and started walking back to my front door. Almost as soon as I turned towards my house, I heard this deep, panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog, but what made me note back to my front door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leaped up onto my porch, turned, and drew my gun again, expecting something right there. But again, there was nothing. A couple of weeks later, I was on my porch at night, sitting on a bench with my wife. She got up and walked inside to get something, and as soon as she shut the door, I heard that panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet this sounded like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere, and it was very loud. Again, I couldn't see anything, so I noped back inside my house. Now at this point, I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happening, I let it go. A month or so later, it was a really rainy and stormy night. This was around 9 p.m., and my wife and I enjoy listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing the rain is. Me, growing up in Oregon, loved the rain, and for the past 10 years we lived in Vegas, where it would dump the entire year of rain in a day, then be bone dry for the rest of the year. For my wife, who grew up in Nevada, rain was such a rare thing. She loved going outside and watching the rain. So, for us, this is an enjoyable experience. Except this night in particular, things took a weird turn. As we were sitting there talking about the rain and relaxing, my wife stops me and said, "Did you hear that?" "No. What did you hear?" I asked. "I swear it sounded like a small child calling for help out in the woods beside our house," she said. "No, I didn't hear anything," I replied. After a few moments of us listening intently, she said, "There it is again." "I didn't hear a thing, sweetie. Are you sure you're not just hearing things?" I told her. She looked at me offended that I didn't hear anything and said, "No, I'm positive. How could you not hear that? It was our son. I think he's out there and got lost." "No, he's in the house sleeping on the couch," I replied. We then both looked through the blinds that were open right behind us, and we could see all of our children laying there. "That's so weird. I swear it sounds like our son," my wife said. "Well, it isn't him. He's right there. Besides, I don't hear anything," I told her. She then stands up and says, "Wow, he's really crying out for help. I need to go look for him." Now at this point, if you knew my wife, you would know she's absolutely creeped out by the woods and wouldn't be caught dead walking into them during daylight, much less at night during a storm. I grabbed her hand and said, "I've been listening intently, and there's absolutely nobody calling out for help. You need to stay here." At this point, I'm getting worried about her. She was acting completely out of character, not to mention that at this time she was 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. She then says, "What if there's some child out there lost in the woods?" Well, first off, I would be able to hear them too. Secondly, there are no other kids around here for miles, and the odds of them being lost 100 feet from our house that's lit up like a Christmas tree is nil, I told her. "I know, but what if it's a kid?" she says. Before I could say anything else, she stands up and starts walking towards the stairs. I jumped up and grabbed her hand again and said, "No, you're not. Get in the house. I don't know what's going on, but you need to go inside." She then complies and we both go inside. I didn't know what that was, but it freaked me out. A few months after this, just as it was getting dark outside, I heard the front door to our house open, and I got up to investigate. We have autistic 6-year-old twins, and we have the door set up so that they can't open it without us there. So to hear this sound, it could only be my wife. What was weird was the fact that she usually doesn't go outside without saying something to me. I walked out the front and saw my wife walking down our private road towards the drive on the side of our house. I asked her what she's doing, and she says she was sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying out in the woods. I said, "Seriously? And you just decided to walk off into the woods and investigate?" She then looks out to the woods and says, "See? There it is again, and I can't hear anything. But what I did notice is that it was completely silent out again." I told her just like before, the chances of a baby being out in the woods outside of our house is slim, and that she needed to get back into the house. "What if someone left the baby out there?" she said. "Well, if that were true, I would hear it too," I replied. Now at this point, I was really starting to worry about my wife's mental health. I actually asked her to see a psychiatrist, and she did. Now, looking back, I feel really bad about this, knowing what I do. The key to this moment was that my wife had just given birth to a baby girl a month before. A few days after this, we're out front on the porch. It's early evening and I just mowed the lawn this day, and our 3-year-old son was riding around in his little car in front of the house. Now, he knows that he's not allowed outside of a certain area that we mapped off. He loves playing outside, but with the road being 50 feet from our front porch, we have to be careful, as a lot of boaters will fly through after drinking all day on their boats. As we were talking, we're both keeping an eye on him. A neighbor drives by and stops to say hi for a second. This interaction took approximately 8 seconds, as all they said were, "How are things?" "Good," we replied, and he told us he would stop by later as his wife got something for the kids. We said, "Okay, great," and he drove off. I looked over where our son was, and he was gone. I called out his name and ran over to the side of our house, and I could hear his car on our side drive. I scolded him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish and pointed to the woods behind our house. "You have 5 seconds to get back to the front of the house or else," I told him, and he adamantly pointed back in the direction of the woods, and kept trying to tell me something. I looked off in the direction of the woods and just assumed he saw a deer or a squirrel or something and wanted to see it up close. I walked him back up to the front of the house, and he cried the whole way there. He got really upset that I wouldn't let him go into the woods. But I just wrote this off as him being curious, and most 3-year-old boys are. Now this instance isn't isolated, as our twins have done something similar, but not quite as extreme as this. There have been nights where we had just laid down for the night and heard a loud bang on the side of our house on the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped up and looked out the window. Our floodlight had come on, but I could see nothing. Now the weird part about this is that our bedroom sits about 12 feet from the ground level, as we have a full-size basement that's cinder block. I put on my slippers and grabbed one of my 12-gauge shotguns and walked outside to investigate. It was dead silent again. The floodlight that's on the side of the house had clicked off at this point, so I walked over to the end of the deck and shined my light around the yard. There was nothing. I walked around the house and shined the light around intently. As I approached the back side of my house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt like something was watching me. I shined the light up in the trees, but again, nothing. I rounded the corner, and the first thing I noticed was that my 3 dogs that were in their area weren't making a peep. Now our dogs have no filter and will bark at anyone and everyone. This includes me, so to see them all hiding with their tails between their legs, not making a peep, really had me worried. As I kept walking, all of a sudden the crickets and frogs started making sounds again. It was as if someone had clicked a switch. I walked back into the house and told my wife that I hadn't seen anything. She shrugged and said okay, as long as our dogs were okay. Due to the circumstances that night, I decided to let the dogs in and sleep with us. This very same thing has happened on all 4 exterior walls of our house. It's random and annoying, but just like this instance, every time there's nothing going on outside. There have also been times where we were sitting in the house, and as I was watching a movie, my wife walked over to me and said, "Did you call me?" I told her no, and she said she swears she heard me call her name in her ear. She said it was definitely my voice, but she didn't understand because it was so close, and I was a good 20 feet away from her in my recliner. The important part of this was that she was sitting at the table doing something, and the slider to the backyard was open behind her. Now, our patio sits about 20 feet off the ground and is like a balcony, as it has no stair access outside. I think the previous owner built it for barbecuing. There have been several instances where she would say she heard someone whisper in her ear, but she couldn't make out the sound. Again, I kept thinking she was going crazy, but as you will see, I think all of this is tied into this final moment where things are revealed. The last thing I want to mention before we get into what just happened is that I have a shooting range built behind my workshop on the opposite side of our property, next to the main road. It's kind of on a downslope, but it works perfectly for what I need it for. The range itself cuts straight into the woods, going about 100 yards or so. When you're at the downrange, you have woods surrounding you on all sides, except back up to my shop. I have to say, it has always felt creepy when I'm dealing with my targets or mowing. When you're down there, it feels like you're miles from anyone. One day, around 5 in the evening, I was sighting in a new rifle scope. The sun was still up, but was starting to fade soon, so I knew this was going to be the final test. Up until this point, nothing really happened while I was making my multiple trips downrange, other than this feeling of uneasiness. As I got downrange, I kept feeling like someone or something was watching me. I looked around, but didn't see anything. As I was placing stickers over my previous shots, I heard something big off to the side of me. It sounded like a large branch had snapped off a tree. Now, if you've been in the Tennessee woods, You will know that a lot of branches fall off trees randomly out of nowhere, so this is nothing new. Except this time, it was very loud and sounded like fresh, strong wood, if that makes any sense. I turned and looked, but again couldn't see anything. I started walking back up to my rifle, and I swear I heard someone right behind me. I turned around, but again saw nothing. As I started to walk, I heard this deep growl. It was really deep and loud, and what's worse is that it was all around me. I turned around, facing the range, and started walking backwards. The thought of some rabid dog charging out of the bushes had me freaked out, so running wasn't a good idea. I slowly walked backwards up the hill to my rifle, but nothing happened. I grabbed my rifle and sprayed the target with rapid fire, hoping to scare off whatever was stalking me. I left 10 rounds in the mag and grabbed my rifle bag and quickly walked back up to the house. I never told my wife about this, as I didn't want her to freak out. Fast forward about a year later from when we moved in, and my niece is staying with us as a live-in nanny to earn money over summer break from college. We were on our way back from the store, and about a mile from our house, I saw 2 eyes reflecting the headlights coming from a wide tree on the side of the road just ahead. It had caught my attention because they were higher than a deer, but also a different color and size. Just as I had said, "What is that?" and squinted, they vanished. I made a comment that it was almost as if it had known I could see its eyes, and it moved. The color was kind of golden and green, but they resembled the mannerisms of a large cat as they felt ominous. It's hard to explain, but I shrugged it off as we were passing the tree and saw nothing. A few moments later, we arrive at the house. As we're getting bags out of the car, my 3-year-old came bolting out of the house, excited to see me. As I was waiting to help her carry in her bags, I heard my dog growl. I looked in the direction. She was looking at my neighbor's property across the street. Now, what I saw kept me up all night. Up until this point, I've always been skeptical, as I've never seen anything with my own 2 eyes. Even with what had happened to me the year prior, I still had my doubts that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Now my street is kind of a spread out neighborhood. Each house sits on several acres, and at the end of our road is Kentucky Lake. My neighbor's house sits adjacent to my house on about an acre lot. Directly in front of my house is a wall of woods, and directly behind my house is several thousand acres of untouched forest. As I was looking across the street to my neighbor's property, I saw a large dark figure between the trees at first. The movement caught me off guard, as it looked like something big moved quickly on all 4s. Then, when it came out into clear view, it stood up and walked like a man. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. It was very tall, but what was strange about it was the distance it was covering, and the fact that when it was in front of his shed, I swear I could see through it. It was clearly walking quickly, but moving faster than any person could at a sprint. More importantly, there was no sound. It was like it was phasing in and out of reality as it moved. I said, "What the hell is that?" and realized that it was looking directly at us. It had moved at an angle away from us to minimize its time out in the open, and moving as quickly as it could while still being silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized that whatever it was stalking us. I told my niece to get in the house now, and I grabbed my son and booked it inside. I grabbed my AR-15 with a short scope and came back outside to see my niece still grabbing stuff out of her car. Knowing I told her firmly and clearly to get in the house, her disregard to my command annoyed me, but still I watched over her without saying a word. As she was slowly walking, she turned towards the woods across the street from my house and suddenly bolted for the house. She ran up the steps in a panicked state. I asked her what she saw, and her face was pale as a ghost. She said, "I heard something big in the woods walking loudly on the leaves, and when I turned toward it, I heard a deep, guttural growl." I asked her why she didn't come when I told her, and she said she thought I was talking to my son. I told her what I had seen, and she wanted to get a closer look to see if she could see something. I told her that it was not a good idea, and she went anyway. As she was walking down the walkway, I heard the sound of dry leaves crunching in the woods across the street. I told her to stop and come take the flashlight. Now at this point, she's about 6 foot away from my wife's SUV. As she turned and started walking back to me, I caught a glimpse of something gray and hairy bolt from behind the SUV back across the street into the woods. My porch is a raised porch, and our SUV is about 6'5" tall, and whatever this was cleared it about 45 feet in what looked like a single jump. It moved like lightning. Whatever it was, it wanted my niece. It jumped behind the car out of my line of sight and was waiting for her. She still doubted my warnings and grabbed the flashlight and walked back toward the car. As she entered my driveway, she stopped dead in her tracks and leaned forward as if she could see something. I asked her what she saw. She turned and ran back up on the porch with a terrified look on her face, saying, "Nope," over and over again. She said it was a figure hiding inside of a tree and that she saw its eyes. I asked her what they looked like, and all she could say was that they looked dull red at first, but as she got closer, they looked dead. I said, "What do you mean dead?" And she said that the pupils looked gray, kind of like the way eyes look when they go blind. She said it was really dark gray, and she swears she could see through it, almost like a dark cloud. She wanted to go out again and took a step down the stairs, and as she did, it revealed itself from the tree. I said, "Get inside," and I went in and locked the door. It looked like a tall human-shaped being. It was really tall and looked ominous as hell. The next morning, we did a height comparison to the tree limb we saw it stand over, and we put its height to around 9 feet tall, and its eyes were about 6 inches apart. At this point, I don't know what this thing was. After doing some research, I think this thing was a glimmerman or crawler. I looked to see if there had been any other sightings in Benton County, but nothing. More importantly, I swear it would phase in and out, almost like a shadow person, but bigger and more obvious. One of the things that makes this fit is that it can communicate telepathically. This explains why everyone was hearing something that nobody else could hear. Secondly, it has a playback-like communication, so when I heard a dog panting, it was probably one of my dogs it had heard. My wife was actually hearing our son crying for help, as he had recently fell and cried for help. The baby crying would be our newborn baby, who she'd given birth to recently, and it must have heard me calling my wife's name, and kept telepathically calling my wife's name with my voice. Another thing is that my niece had said that night was the night she felt compelled to go back outside. She said she'd felt this thing was communicating with her somehow, and it wanted her to go back outside. The more I read about this thing, the more everything that's been happening over the past year makes sense. One thing that I find extra convincing is that down the roads towards the lake, there's a property that's cordoned off with barbed wire, and there's a wall of forest with no driveway. A lot of the property down our road is underdeveloped owned land, and on one of the trees, there's this large old sign that says, "Screamer lives here," with an arrow pointing back into the woods. Now I have to admit, when I first saw the sign, I laughed, thinking maybe the owner screamed at trespassers who entered his property, and teenagers put up the sign to mess with him. But when I did a satellite search of our neighborhood, that entire section of road has no houses or trails or anything. It's just pure forest for as far as the eye can see. One of the things that this thing is said to do is make a loud scream when threatened. Now that you understand my story, I doubt this is the ending. The next question is, what can we do? I don't want my wife or kids to disappear one day. And if there's more than one of these sightings out there, this really makes the missing 411 make a whole lot of sense. I feel perplexed and scared as to what I can do. I wanted to update. Thank you all for the support. Unfortunately, we can't afford to get a camera system or trail cameras that many have recommended. I'm a disabled veteran, and I just lost my business due to the lockdowns. We're struggling to afford the basic amenities currently. One night when my niece arrived, we went out on the front porch to welcome her. I did notice something that looked like a face staring at me, but what was weird was that as I was staring at it, it moved back into the shadow without moving, if that makes any sense. The one thing that I would like to add in this update that I hadn't thought was connected was about 2 to 3 weeks ago, my wife and I had been in an argument about something silly. She decided to walk into our woods to clear her head. I was on the back patio when I noticed her walking down our shooting range. I asked her where she was going, and she said, to cool off. Now, I knew the chances of something happening to her were slim, but I found it odd that she chose to go into the woods rather than simply walking down the road. I quickly got dressed and went to go down to try and bring her back. I went to the end of the range and called her name. After a few minutes of calling out, I heard nothing. Not a peep or a twig or anything. Now the weird part is that it is impossible to move around in these woods without making any sound, especially for her. I was worried that she was walking too far, but I had to get back into the house as our children were alone. It freaked me out because it was as if she had vanished. I went back into the house and debated calling someone, but I figured I would give her a bit more time. I went to the back patio and waited. After about an hour, I started to get really worried. I called out her name again and decided that I would call if she hadn't returned at the hour-and-a-half mark. After another 20 minutes went by, she came walking back out of the woods. Angry that she'd worried me so much, yet also relieved, I asked her what she was thinking. She said, "What?" as she walked back up into the house. She came in and looked at me like I was crazy. I said, "Did you not hear me calling out to you?" She said she only heard me once, and she replied, and this is where it gets crazy. She said, "I've only been gone for 10 to 15 minutes. Why are you freaking out?" When I told her that she'd been gone for an hour and 20 minutes, she didn't believe me. She also said that when she went down there, she didn't go very far. But when she turned around, she started walking and got worried that she was lost. She said she didn't recognize where she was, but something told her to keep walking. She said it felt strange and that the air felt different. When she came back out of the woods, she was relieved to see the house. Now, the part that upsets me the most about this was that where she said she was impossible. I was literally standing 20 to 30 feet away from that spot. If she had been there, not only would I have seen her, but she could have talked to me in a normal voice. My concern is that you can see the house from this spot, and how she felt lost is mind-boggling. I don't know what this was. I thought that again she was just losing her mind. I plan to go back where she was with her to prove that you can see the house from there, but I want her to show me exactly where all she went, as well as talk me through everything. An update on June 24th, 2022. Weird things kept happening. My 3-year-old son was playing on the back patio a few feet away from us, and all of a sudden, the dogs inside jump and start barking as one of our dogs, Duke, that's on the patio with him, comes bolting into the door. I jump up to see what's going on, and my son's pointing at the tree line saying, "Werewolf, Daddy, werewolf." Now my son loves watching videos of werewolves for toddlers for some reason. I would normally put this off as nothing, but if you saw the look on his face, you would know that he was serious. Plus, with the way my dogs reacted, he had to have seen something. I pulled out my phone and began recording. He kept saying, "Daddy, look, werewolf in the bushes." I tell him I can't see anything, but I can hear something really big in the leaves. An update on September 7th, 2022. My niece quit. She said she couldn't handle all the stuff that's been happening to her. Everything was fine for a while. We kept indoors for the most part. We went out on the porch one night with a flashlight and camera, hoping to catch something. We kept hearing things in the brush, which could be anything. After a while of not seeing anything, we went back inside. I said my prayers and then slept like a baby. My niece, however, did not. She woke up late the next day and seemed a bit jumpy. I asked her what's wrong. She said that she didn't sleep well as something was outside her window. It took a bit of prodding to get her to talk about it. She said she could hear something big outside her window, but every time she looked, she couldn't see anything. She said she heard weird noises that she couldn't describe. She came out to the living room to see if I was still up, but I was fast asleep. She decided to go back to her room and go to sleep watching YouTube on her phone. She said she was almost asleep when she felt something standing right behind her. She turned around and there was nothing. She said she kept having that feeling, but brushed it off as her imagination. That was until about 3 a.m. when she woke up. She said she had her phone on the windowsill playing a video. She had the same feeling as before, but this time it was very intense. Like whatever it was, it wanted to devour her. She turned around quickly and saw what looked like a shadow disappear into the wall in the blink of an eye. She told me this kept happening until she passed out late in the morning. I told her that it was weird, as we've never experienced anything like that in the house before. We have had weird things happen, like things disappear for a while, then reappear days or months later in the exact spot they last were. She said it felt like whatever this was, it made her feel like it wanted to hurt her. I told her to keep me updated and let me know if anything else happens. A few days later, she asks if she can use the hot tub that's out back. I explain that it's off and we can't afford to heat it. When we go over to it, I open it to look inside. To my disbelief, not only is it on, but the water looks great, minus a little cleanup that needed to be done. As I'm walking around, all of a sudden, I hear this really loud thump behind me, like a log falling onto the ground or a really big boulder hitting the ground. Imagine an engine block falling 20 feet onto soft soil. It made me jump. I turned around but couldn't see anything as the brush was too thick. I helped her work on the spa. Then she says she's going to go inside and get changed so she can get in. I look around and realize that it's getting dark outside, and I really don't want to be out here. I bend over to work on getting the filter cleaned out, and I hear what sounds like something big snapping branches and charging at me. It made me jump, then run to the back door. I turned around to see what it was, and nothing. I walk back into the house and walk up the stairs. I tell her I heard something out there, and she looked at me for a minute, then said, "Well, I want to get in and relax." She asks if I can leave the back patio door open, so if she needs me, she can call. But according to her, she enjoyed the spa without incident. Every day I notice her getting more anxious and less willing to talk about it. She says every night something new happens to her, but when I ask her to elaborate, she would refuse. A few nights later, I walk out on the porch and notice it's dead quiet again. I ask her to come out on the porch with me, but she says she's tired and wants to call her boyfriend and go to bed. My wife gets up early and takes care of the kids, and it's my job to handle the night shift, so she's in bed at this point. I decide I don't have the guts to do this alone, so I put on a movie and relax in my recliner. I end up falling asleep, then wake up at 3 a.m. to a noise coming from my niece's room. It sounds like a deep voice, and I knock on the door. I call out several times, but get nothing in response. I figure it must be her video and decide to let it be. I head to bed, and just as I start to pass out, another loud bang happens. I wake up to hear what sounds like something skittering on the wall outside of my bedroom. Understand that this is way up in the air and physically impossible. I look out the window, but don't see anything. After going out and checking on this bang multiple times over the last year and seeing nothing, I decide to forget it and go back to sleep. The next day, my niece comes out and tells me that she had the shadow thing happen again, except this time she left her light on. She said she woke up to getting that feeling again. She said that when she opened her eyes, she could see an extremely tall, shadowy figure standing over the top of her. She said it was moving closer to her, and just as she started to see the details of its face, she turned around in panic, but nothing was there. She said the eyes haunted her, but didn't want to elaborate any further. The next morning, for the first time ever, my niece is up bright and early. I noticed she looked anxious as she told me that she's headed home for the 4th of July weekend and will be back on Tuesday. I ask her if she's okay, and she says yes, and quickly walks out the door. Later that day, I get a call from my sister telling me that she won't be coming back. I ask her if everything's all right, and she says yes, that she just wants to enjoy the rest of her summer. A little while later, I get a call from my niece telling me that she doesn't want to work here anymore, as she can't handle the anxiety from whatever is out there. She doesn't elaborate more than that, but whatever has been going on in her room has her petrified. I checked on her room and noticed that she's been sleeping with one of the windows wide open. The window is perfectly accessible from the outside. I don't know what's been going on, but whatever it is, looks like it could have been coming into the room. Fast forward to the 4th of July. I do fireworks out front of the property by the road facing the woods. Due to what's been happening at night, I decided to do them prior to it getting dark outside. We do our fireworks, and just as it starts getting dark, I get everyone inside. After a couple of hours, I remember that my hose is still on the ground and laying out by the road. I head out to clean everything up and put the hose away. While I'm doing this, I notice it's dead silent again, minus the sound of the fireworks in the distance. The hairs on the back of my neck go up, and I get the feeling that I'm being watched again. I hurry and coil the hose and ran back into the house. I swear, I'm starting to wonder if it's just my mind playing tricks on me at this point.